Manda Trash Panda with an episode of Let's Clean This Stuff Up, I guess. I stopped at our favorite beauty store today and noticed that they like to hide the cables separate from the actual hair tools. So I do have, let's see, down here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 cords altogether. So I wasn't able to find all of them for the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 hair straighteners. Almost all of them are the Paul Mitchell Pro Tools, with the exception of this Chi right here. So they've put the actual straighteners inside their soup, and I'm going to attempt to get them all cleaned off. I've got some fragrance-free makeup removing wipes, just a store brand, and then I've got some other better ones in case I run out. So we'll see how it goes. But I love how easily these makeup wipes just take everything right off. Alright guys, here is the repair part of the video, and this is where we're going to be doing a little bit of soldering. First I'm going to go over all of the different tools that I have here. I know it looks a little bit intimidating, but trust me, it's really easy. And if I can do it, you can do it. So, we're going to be taking one of our Paul Mitchell flat irons that we found, and we're going to go from this to this. Where it powers on and heats up by repairing the cord that they cut. So the first thing you're going to need is a soldering gun or soldering iron of some sort. I have two different ones here. This one I got really cheap actually at my Harbor Freight store. It was like $5. I like this one for doing precision type jobs like what we're gonna do today. So this comes with the soldering iron, and then it comes with a little stand. So it doesn't come with the actual solder that you'll need, which is this right here, the electrical solder, but you can also pick this up at any hardware store pretty cheap. And then you are going to want specifically electrical solder with lead. And this also has the rosin core as well. I don't know if you can read that or not. Some kits will come with this separately that I have here, and I'll explain this in just a little bit. So you can have this type of soldering iron. I also have this one here, and this is actually the one that I learned on. It's a gun trigger style soldering iron. This one's pretty cool because it does have a little LED light on it when you turn it on, so that way you can have more of a light to see what you're doing. This one, like I said, I learned on, but for doing these types of wires that I'm going to be showing you how to do today, I thought that it might be a little bit easier to use my smaller iron, and the reason being is with the trigger style, while I do like it, it gets hot, it feels nice in your hand, it is a little bit bulky, and the problem with this is it starts to cool off as soon as you let go of this trigger. So you really want your soldering iron to stay nice and hot, so which is why I got the smaller one. So as soon as I plug it in, it'll start heating up, which I need to do. So I'll be plugging that in just a second. So we've got your choice of soldering iron. I'm going to be using this one today. I've got my electrical solder, and this is actually what you're going to use in combination with your soldering iron to heat up the wires and get your copper wires to soak this material into the wires, creating a nice tight connection. So I'll show you guys how to do that here in just a little bit. I have my helping hands. You can also pick this up at any hardware store. I also picked this one up at Harbor Freight for a really good deal. I've seen them on Amazon, Home Depot has them, Lowe's, any hardware store. This definitely helps a lot. I've seen people work without them. I've seen people make their own versions of these with a pair of vice grips and these little alligator clips. So, you know, up to you whether you want to buy one of these or make your own. I chose to buy one because I paid, I think, also $5 for this. You will also need some wire cutters and wire strippers. I found this pair on Amazon for, I think there was a coupon on it as well. I think they were normally like $17 or $18. I got these for $11. I really like these. It's got a wire stripping action in there, and then it has the cutters and the crimp tool as well. So you can use, if you've got a pair like this, great. If not, if you have something like these, this will work too. The reason why I'm not using these is the cutting part right here where it actually strips the wire has gotten a little bit old and it just doesn't cut as well, so I'm just not going to be using these today. But if you have a pair that's got the cut and strip tool, great. That's really all you need. Another thing that I have that I'm going to be using and that you should get is a damp sponge. You will need this when you're actually soldering, and I will show you why once we get into the actual solder. Alright, so I just plugged in my soldering iron. I'm going to let that heat up while we go over these last couple things. You will definitely need some heat shrink tubing. I also got this kit at my local Harbor Freight store. I like this set here. It comes with 127 pieces of different variety of sizes with the black tubing. So I use these smaller ones for these smaller gauge wire, which I'll show you here in a little bit once we actually get into it. And then with the thicker wire like this, you're going to want to cover where you've stripped this outer casing off. So you've got different sizes here for your different gauge of wire. So this definitely comes in handy. I've seen sets that come with white and gray, red, all different sorts of colors. I've seen these sets on Amazon where you can get, I think it was like a 500 piece. They've got a lot of different options on Amazon, of course, so, but I definitely would recommend, if you're going to be soldering some wires together from your dumpster finds, I definitely recommend getting some of this heat shrink tubing. Another thing that you can get instead of this variety pack, as long as you know what gauge wire you're working with, you could also buy this little roll of heat shrink tubing. This 1/4 inch size, I've noticed, has fit on these standard wires, once again, to cover up this bit here that you'll have exposed. So I might use a little bit of both. I might use some of the smaller pieces from here and then a cut to fit for this section here. And for the purpose of the video, I did go ahead and strip these wires how I want them. You want to try to stagger these connections, and I probably should have staggered them a little bit more, so I have this bit starting back here, but I think it's going to be fine because I'm also going to be putting the heat shrink tubing on there to prevent those connections from touching, because you have your pot and your ground, and you definitely don't want those to be touching after you plug your device back in, because that's how you can start a fire. So let's get set up here. I'm going to be repairing this one because I do have a little bit of a tip on here to work with, but if you come across one like this, where they've cut it really close to the edge here, underneath this bit right here is actually more wire, and so if you need to cut into this, another thing to have would be like a little blade or a box cutter, so that way you can cut into this thicker piece right here. And that's actually what I had to do in order to fix this one here. If you notice, this little piece is shorter, just because I had to cut that outside casing off and get my fix right up in here, my solder repair, but it works just fine, and I'm going to be showing you the correct way to repair that today. So while I've been going over everything, this should be heating up to the temperature that I want it to be, and I'm going to go ahead and put my heat shrink tube, give myself a little bit of extra space to work with here. I am going to use the roll. Measure out about how much I want, and then you want a little bit of overlap on each side. So accounting for this little tip here, I'm going to do a little bit more than that. I'd rather have too much than too little, because you could always trim off excess before you shrink it if you have too much. So, and now you can use your wire cutters, or you can use a pair of scissors. Either way, I'm going to use scissors. And you definitely want to put your heat shrink tubing on first, because once you solder these wires together, you're not going to be able to get this tubing on there. And then another tip, while you're soldering, when you're getting started, when you're getting everything set up, is you want to have your heat shrink tubing as far away from where you're going to be soldering as possible, because the heat from shrinking this down, or the heat to shrink this down, can actually come from your soldering iron, and having that heat shrink tubing too close, it will actually activate that, and you're going to be stuck with wherever you left it. So try to put it as far away as you can from where you're actually going to be soldering. So I know it's hard to see because it's black on black, but that ends about right here. And then I've got all this space away from my wires. All right. I'm gonna go ahead and get the tubing for this bit. Start with this one. Now this, I did strip a little bit more of the black casing away from these wires, just so that way I could leave myself that little extra space to try to prevent this from heating up while I'm soldering my wires back together. I'm going to go ahead and do the hot side first. Bring this to the other side here. Hopefully you guys can see that. So I got that set up about how I want it, and I'm actually going to take my wire strippers and I'm going to strip off probably about 1/4 inch of this right here. It's a bit thick. Let's see if we can get it in there. May have to do this manually because this thick part isn't really cooperating. That self-adjusting wire strip. Darn. Alright. And that's why I recommend having something like this on hand. There we go. See? Easy as that. Probably just took a little bit too much of that off. I do still have a little bit right here, but I am going to trim that down just a little bit to match up with the length of the wire that I have exposed over there. Alright. Once you have your wire exposed on both sides, what you are going to want to do, there's a couple different ways you can do this. I'm going to show you the method that I find is easiest for me when you're dealing with a small amount of exposed wire. And also remember, make sure you're going from black to black and white to white. Most of your wires should be color coded, so make sure you're connecting the right ones. What I'm going to do, I've seen some people where they just spray these wires a little bit, put them together like so, and then twist. Sometimes it works for me, sometimes it doesn't. You can also put them together like an X, pinch one side and twist, and then do the same on the other. I'm going to try to do that first method for this first because I feel like intermingling these wires and twisting them together creates the best connection. So I'm going to try that first. If I can't do that, then I'll try that other way that I showed you. Intermingle. Twist these up. And then I'm going to go down on this side. Alright. Next, what I'm going to do, I like putting my sponge underneath where I'm going to be working because I know you don't mean to, but it can happen where the solder drips down onto your table. So if you're working on a wood table, I would make sure you have that surface covered. Like I said, I like to put my sponge underneath my work area. So I'm going to get myself set up here. Trying to make sure I don't have any wires sticking out. Alright, that looks good. Alright. And here comes the fun part. Now that your soldering iron should be nice and hot, pull out enough of your solder that you feel comfortable working with. What you're going to do is place your soldering iron right underneath where your copper wires are. Wait for that to heat up. And what you want to do is place the tip of your solder on top of the wires and just wait for those copper wires to heat up the solder right here. Because what you want to do is have your copper wires draw in the solder. I've seen some where they've taken the solder directly to their solder iron and dripped it on top. You definitely don't want to do that. It's not a very good connection, and you actually create little sharp points on it that could actually rip through your heat shrink tubing. Once again, I'm just waiting for that heat transfer. And what you want to do is make sure when you're doing your solder is you want to be able to see the shape of the wires. So what I'm doing is I'm gonna reflow some of this solder. And what I mean by that is just heating it back up, and I'm gonna get it to soak in to those wires. If you can't see the shape of your wires, you're using too much solder. And the best thing, honestly, if you're new at soldering, practice makes perfect. I'm pretty new, and in no way am I a professional, but with practice, you get better. So I'm going to set this guy aside and take a look at how we've done here. Not too bad. There's a couple parts that have a little bit of excess on the outside. That's where I was trying to reflow. But you can see, hopefully you can see, how you can see the outline of where I twisted those wires together. So you don't want that solder globbed on there, but you want it to soak into those wires and make a nice connection. If I try pulling on this, it's not going to come apart. So after you've got the first bit soldered together, you're going to take your heat shrink tubing. I'm going to slide that as far as I can go, since that does butt up right to where that connection is there. I'm going to kind of hold that in place. And now you can either use just a regular lighter to get this heat shrink to activate, or you can, if you have or you're able to get a heat shrink gun. I think I picked this up at my hardware store for like 10 bucks. It's a cheaper one. I've seen them go up to, I think there was one there for like 30. And I'm sure you can get these at Amazon, Home Depot, probably even Walmart has these too. So if you have a lighter, like I said, that works fine too. And what you want to do is try to work your way from the inside out. So that way you create a nice airtight seal to prevent water or, any elements getting in there. So I'm going to move my sponge aside, and I'm going to go ahead and turn this on. Hopefully you can see this heat shrink in action. Rotate a little bit. Alright, and it's that quick. It only takes a couple seconds. And now we've got a nice, protected, and strong electrical connection there. Still a little bit warm to the touch, but I like to try to bend it a little bit. So that way you've got that flexibility with your wire. And now we just do the same thing to the other side. So I've got it reflowed. So I had a little bit too much on one side, and I really didn't want to add too much more. So I took my soldering gun and just kind of held it on there to heat it back up. Should be good now. It's not my best. I've definitely done a little bit better. Should be cooled down. Yeah, it cools down pretty quickly. you can kind of see the outline of the wires, but like I said, it might have been the way I twisted the wires up too, but still a solid connection. Like, there's no pulling that apart. So what I'm going to do now is go ahead and slip my heat shrink tubing as far over as I can get it, since we're butting up right there next to that swivel piece. Turn on my heat gun. And it's that quick, guys. You can see that has shrunken down and taken shape of the wires there. Give it a little bit of a bend just to make sure we have some flexibility. And then, last step, towards the beginning, I put that heat shrink tubing over the main wires here. So now what I'm going to do is slide my big section of heat shrink tubing over my soldered connections. And because I staggered the wire, one was a little bit longer than the other, but if you do it right, you can still get your tubing over as long as you have a big enough section to go over it. So once again, it shrinks down pretty good. So I'm probably actually going to trim about this much off of it. So I'm just going to grab my scissors. Once again, I'd rather have too much than too little. And then I'll trim that up a little bit once I'm done shrinking that on. Here we go, last step. Start from the middle. Your way out. Alright, got our heat shrink tubing on there. Mold that how I want it, so that covers that connection really well and kind of hides that repair. So now, it's the moment of truth. Get down to my plug right here. Look at that. How amazing is that? So it just goes to show you, with a little bit of tools, you can make your dumpster finds that have cut wires work again, just like new. thank you guys so much for coming to my channel. Thank you for watching this little tutorial. I hope it was really helpful and gives you guys a little bit of hope for finding items with cut cords, because you can fix these things, as you just saw me do with this hair straightener that I found at Ulta. Please be sure to like this video if you found it helpful, and subscribe down below if you haven't already. Thanks, guys, and if you're out diving, be safe, and as always, happy diving.